A certain mood has gripped the country lately. I feel it. I'm sure you do too. Everywhere I go, people ask me when there's going to be a federal election. Canadians felt a flicker of hope when the NDP announced that it would be ending the supply confidence agreement that saw the party supporting the federal government in return for, well, honestly, nothing. That hope ended quickly when the Bloc Quebecois announced that it would back the Trudeau Liberals in return for concessions that will benefit just one province and further disunify the country. So naturally, the Conservatives are using their first opposition day today, since Parliament resumed, to table a vote of a motion of non-confidence in the Liberals. Unless we see an act of divine intervention, however, it is possible. I saw one at the attempted assassination of Trump at the Butler, Pennsylvania rally. That vote is certainly going to end with the Liberals remaining in power. Because in this country, like in so many others, politicians increasingly don't represent the people who are suffering, angry, and ready for change. They represent themselves and their own political interests, like, dare I say, their pensions. Later in the show, we'll also be joined by Adam Zivo to discuss his new documentary. I'm Rachel Parker. Welcome to The Rachel Parker Show. Hey everyone, welcome back to the Rachel Parker Show. I want to start by discussing one of the hottest news stories of the day, which is the non-confidence motion that the Conservatives will be tabling in the House of Commons today. I think we can expect to see a vote on that motion tomorrow. Things are always subject to change in the House of Commons, however. Now, I think by introducing this motion on their first opposition day, the Conservatives are really gathering and they are focusing on the mood of the nation right now, which, as I said in my opening, really is of one, people who are waiting for an election. Everywhere I go, people are asking me, when do you think there's going to be a federal election? Feels like at every opportunity that there might be one. For example, the other week when Jagmeet Singh announced that he would be ending his supply confidence agreement with the Trudeau Liberals, a lot of people were initially very excited over that. And they thought, finally, we're going to have an election before the end of the year. And the reason why the country as a whole is so focused on a federal election is because people are suffering right now. Costs are so high everywhere, whether you're at the grocery store, whether you're paying for rent, whether you're looking to buy a house, and those mortgage rates are still quite high compared to what they were just a few years ago. And everyone is ready for a change in government. Justin Trudeau has not succeeded in capturing the moment. Those sunny days are long gone. They've been gone for a few years now. And I think the Canadian people understand. We're all looking at the polls. We're seeing that Pierre Poilievre's Conservative Party is 20 points up in the polls. And Canadians, by and large, do not have confidence in the Trudeau Liberals. So it makes sense that this would be the first motion that the Conservatives introduced on their opposition day. Unfortunately, as I've said, it seems almost impossible at this point, without an act of divine intervention, that motion will be successful. Already, the NDP have said that they would continue to support the Liberals and they would be voting no on this motion of non-confidence, and the Bloc Quebecois have also said they will continue to support the Liberals. So, the interesting thing there is that when Jagmeet Singh first announced he would be ending the supply confidence agreement, a lot of people saw through this very quickly. He said he would be ending the supply confidence agreement and would continue to support the Liberals on a case-by-case basis. I mean, Jagmeet Singh is really one of those people who doesn't have a lot of political will. He doesn't seem to have a specific idea of what his party should be doing. That's why his party continually lose seats with every election. And he's just sort of there. He's not really effective. He hasn't been able to, even the entire time he supported the Liberals, he wasn't able to really get any concessions out of them. What advantages did we see for the NDP that entire time they were supporting Justin Trudeau's Liberals? We didn't even see an NDP in cabinet, which I think if another party with a stronger hard line and more ability to negotiate for themselves, like the Conservatives, even the Bloc, I think we could have seen a lot more concessions made for other parties who I think understand politics a little better than Jagmeet. So it was definitely a disappointing day for the country. And I think even Jagmeet, when he announced that he would be ending the supply confidence motion but would continue to support the Liberals on a case-by-case basis, we all knew what that meant. We all knew that meant that he would continue to support the Liberals for a very long time. I don't know that it will be the NDP who first pull the plug. I think it might be the Bloc. Now they've said they will support the Liberals. They've seen an opportunity in this vacuum created by the NDP. And the Bloc Quebecois are going to look for concessions from the Liberal government that will benefit Quebec. that will benefit just one province, which is what the Bloc Quebecois does. And so they're really going to seize on the moment. And so meanwhile, the rest of Canadians across the country are left further and further behind by this government and are feeling the effects of this. Later in the show, we're going to talk a little bit about the Liberal safe supply regime, which has resulted in 15 and 16-year-olds becoming addicted to opioids and in some cases even fentanyl. Now, just a friendly reminder that the reason Safe Supply was created was to help people who were coming off of fentanyl so they could avoid fentanyl and instead be given a less harmful drug. I'm not going to say a harmless drug because I believe that drugs are always harmful. Even if you're taking a Advil or a Tylenol, there's going to be negative effects on your body to get rid of that headache. It often, it really destroys the lining of your stomach. But that was the reason this was created, so that it could get people off of hard drugs like fentanyl, and over time they could become recovered. And instead, it's had the opposite effect because safe supply opioids are so cheap and so accessible. Now we're seeing 15 and 16-year-olds become addicted to opioids because, well, it's actually cheaper than alcohol. So we're going to dive into that later, but that's just another example of the way that people are suffering under the Trudeau Liberals. The high cost of everything is not the only thing. The rampant crime is another reason. So across the board, when we take a look at the Trudeau Liberals, they've objectively failed in every metric that matters to people in their everyday lives: crime, affordability, health and safety. So that's why we're seeing this sentiment from the Conservatives right now, because they understand that the country is trending in the direction of everyone is waiting for an election. And instead, we have two leaders who have the ability to move forward with that election, but would rather work with the Liberals than the Conservatives because they're more ideologically aligned. The Bloc Quebecois and the NDP are more ideologically aligned with the Liberals than they are the Conservatives. So here let's start taking a look at this clip of NDP leader Jagmeet Singh. Just a few weeks ago, he said he was ending that supply confidence agreement, but here he is explaining that he will be voting against the Conservatives' motion of non-confidence and continuing to support the Liberals. You can't make this stuff up, you guys. Take a look at this clip.
New Democrats came to Ottawa to get stuff done, to work for people, to fight for people, not to play Pierre Poilievre's Conservative games. So we will not be supporting Pierre Poilievre's motion. His plan is to not only cut pharmacare, he wants to cut healthcare. He wants to cut pensions. He wants to cut dental care. Our plan is to stop him and then to strengthen our healthcare system, strengthen pensions, make sure that dental care is there for everyone who needs it. The decision moving forward is far too important for Canadians and for the middle class, and so that's why we're not going to let Pierre Poilievre tell us what to do.
Okay, now let's take a look at the Bloc. We also know that they are going to be voting no to this vote of non-confidence. Let's see what they had to say.
J'aurais beau vouloir arriver avec plein de sujets hautement intellectuels et distrayants, ça ne vous intéresserait pas du tout. Alors, à la question, la réponse est non. Donc, est-ce que le Bloc québécois va voter en faveur de la motion des conservateurs la semaine prochaine? La réponse est non. On a déjà eu ces conversations-là à de nombreuses reprises. La motion ne contient absolument rien. Elle dit essentiellement, voulez-vous remplacer Pierre Trudeau par... Justin Trudeau par Pierre Poilievre. Donc, la réponse, c'est non. Le Bloc québécois est au service des Québécois. Il n'est pas au service des conservateurs. Je ne suis pas un conservateur. Je ne connais pas le programme conservateur. Je connais les valeurs conservatrices. Ce ne sont pas les valeurs québécoises. Donc, il n'y aura pas un rabais à Pierre Poilievre pour faire semblant que les bloquistes sont des conservateurs pour le faire remplacer Justin Trudeau. Ça n'arrivera pas.
Okay, so when we talk about Jagmeet Singh and all his many, many flaws in politics, like not being clear on what he wants, now we've just taken a look at the exact opposite. The Bloc Quebecois leader, Yves Blanchet, is being very clear with Canadians as to why he will not be supporting this Conservative motion. And as much as it might frustrate someone like me who spends my time in Ontario and Alberta, and I'm sure it will frustrate many of you who, if you're watching the show, there's a small chance that you might be a little bit more conservative minded. He's at least honest with people. He's at least honest with why he will be voting against this motion, because he was voted and he was put in place by Quebecers, and he wants to support and move forward policies that will benefit his province of Quebec, and he does not see that happening as easily, or if at all, with a Conservative government. He says this motion is essentially to replace Justin Trudeau with Pierre Poilievre. So if you're wondering why he says that, is because the wording of the motion is very plain. The wording of the motion says the House has no confidence in the Prime Minister, and the government. Typically, non-confidence motions, they might talk specifically more about one specific issue or one specific policy. A lot of times, motions, any sort of budgetary policy that's being voted on in the House is automatically a vote of confidence. But here, it's a very simple one-line sentence, and so that's why he's saying, because the Conservatives know they're 20 points up in the polls, and if the government falls, unless the Trudeau Liberals managed to sort of do what we saw over in the States with the Democrats switching out Joe Biden with Kamala Harris at the last minute, and now the Democrats actually have a real shot at forming government in the States once again. Unless the Liberals were able to sort of do a quick switcheroo, then it's basically guaranteed. I mean, nothing's ever certain in politics, but it's basically guaranteed that the Liberals would fall and the Conservatives would form government. And so Bloc Quebecois leader Yves Blanchet recognizes this, and he recognizes that his policies would not benefit. He would not be able to see as many concessions for his province under the Conservatives, and he's frankly not interested in a Conservative government. So as much as we can lament his answer, and it's frustrating because he's not interested in unifying the country and moving forward policies and laws that would benefit all of Canada, at least he's being honest about why he's doing this and what he's doing it for. Where with Jagmeet Singh, we actually don't really have a clear answer from him ever. And we don't really know what his agenda is. And that's why we see attacks on him, like people saying the only reason he's sticking around and the only reason he won't topple the Liberal government is because he wants his pension. And he needs to work for another maybe 8 or so months before he has his pension. And, he gets quite outraged when people say this. So it's like, well, you haven't outlined a good enough reason as to why you're keeping the Liberals in power. The Bloc Quebecois just outlined very specific reasons as to why they're keeping the Liberals in power. And while I might not like it, and you might not like it, it makes sense from their point of view. I don't agree with the party. I don't agree with their objectives of serving just one province in Parliament, which should seek to serve all of Canadians. But at the end of the day, they've been voted in by Quebecers, and that's their interest. And, their reasoning makes sense as much as I disagree with the objective. Whereas Jagmeet Singh has not been able to outline a good reason for keeping the Liberals in power. And that's why you see these sorts of speculations about, he actually has his own political interest and his own, financial interest even for keeping the Liberals around. And so it's discouraging. And I've said this about Jagmeet Singh. I've been very critical of him for a number of years now. I'll be honest, when I first started covering the Trudeau Liberals a number of years ago, when I was just very young, I was conservative, but much less so. There was something a little bit likable about Jagmeet Singh at the time. And over the years, he's actually one of the worst and become one of the most unlikable politicians in Ottawa. I think a lot of people feel that way because he doesn't say anything and he doesn't do anything and he's not honest with Canadians. And people can smell that inauthenticity, yes, that's the word, inauthenticity coming off him from a mile away. And so, I think with this vote, eventually, when we do have this election, like I said, unless there's an act of divine intervention, I don't think it's going to be happening soon. I don't think the Liberal government is going to be toppled tomorrow. I suspect that the NDP will be essentially wiped out because of the very poor leadership that we've seen under Jagmeet Singh. And as I've said, I've been very critical of him. And, I think we're sort of seeing the pressure really get to him. Some of you guys might have seen that clip circulating online where someone was heckling him and he went up to that person was essentially like, did you say that? Did you say that about me? And he's kind of getting all into this guy's face. And, it was kind of just a bizarre thing to watch. And I didn't think too much of it when I saw the initial clip. But then there was a scene later on where he was actually heckling the Conservatives in Parliament and using language that sort of insinuated he wanted to take things outside. Who does this? What politician does this? What politician is heckling his opponent so much so to suggest that they should be taken outside? It's very bizarre. It's very bizarre actions that we're seeing from him. It's sort of a strange switch in his character. And I honestly think the pressure of being so ineffective and so ill-suited for the job of a politician to begin with, but also as a leader of a party, I think he's just sort of starting to crumble as a person. And I think his party is going to crumble in the next election because he's so poorly suited to the job that he is now. For our next guest, we are joined by Adam Zivo. He has just released a new documentary called Government Heroine. He's also the founder and director of the Center for Responsible Drug Policy. We're also going to be joined by Callum Bagnall. If you've watched Government Heroine, which I do suggest you give it a go after the show, he is featured prominently as one of the main interviews, and he's going to share a little bit about his story today as a recovered addict. Adam and Callum, thank you so much for joining me today.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
So I want to just start by touching on your documentary, Adam, Government Heroine. Callum, you are featured prominently as one of the main as one of the main interviews, and you share a little bit about your story as a recovered addict. And one of the things that struck me when you were talking is, by all accounts, you seem like you have a loving family. You seem, fairly well to do. And you didn't exactly strike me as someone who would fall, I think, for a lot of us Canadians, when we think of people who are addicts, you didn't strike me as someone who would fit that category. You were obviously surrounded by a lot of people who cared about you. And I think in the end, that was what eventually pulled you out of your addiction. But I think it speaks to the fact that this crisis is really impacting people we don't think of initially, or we wouldn't initially suspect as being drug addicts. Can you share a little bit about that, if that's sort of your understanding of it as well, when we hear about some of the experts who are saying 15 and 16-year-olds are becoming addicted to government opioids? Is this crisis really changing the narrative on who is becoming addicted to drugs?
Yeah, it definitely is. I remember when I was in high school, I didn't really have the chance to get addicted to Percocets or anything like that, because they would come around very infrequently. Like, you might have a friend who had his wisdom teeth pulled out, or maybe he broke his arm, and that was it. Nothing major. They're only getting like a 1 month supply, maybe less. So there was a very low chance that you would have anybody who could get you any, right? And until I got to college, I kind of got in touch with a guy. I was just hanging out with him, but he was buying Percocets and stuff, and they were extremely easy to get if you had the right guy and the right amount of money. They were expensive though, and so I never really focused too much on that because they were just so expensive. You might get, one time you're able to buy a bunch of them for less than $5 each, 100 or more. But it's very infrequent because they're kind of hard to get, and a lot of them that are really cheap are counterfeits. So you want to avoid those. And you know, uh, but I was really amazed at how available the safe supply pills were. It almost basically, in my addict mind at the time, it was my saving grace, because I couldn't afford Percocets or Oxys anymore, and they were becoming harder and harder to come by. I would have to tell somebody who I knew multiple days in advance before I could get it, and it was always a toss up of whether he was going to have it or not. And when the safe supply really expanded, because I didn't hear too much about it until it really started to expand. It was so easy that I stopped even going to my dealers. I would just go straight to the people who had the prescriptions. And I knew that it would be more advantageous for them too, because if they trade with the dealer, they're not getting much value for their money, right? They're only basically trading for product. And they don't really know the full price of the pills, because they're getting them for free or very, very, very reduced cost, to the point where they're willing to sell it for $1 each, and that kind of amount, the supply and the cheapness of it, makes it so that it's going to become more available. If I was a dealer and I had a bunch of guys that I was selling fentanyl to who owed me money, right, and they were all on safe supply pills, I would say, hey, I'll pick up your scripts every week, and then I'll give you, I'll take, I don't know, $500 off your debt, because I would know that the fentanyl cost me very little money, but I could mark up those safe supply pills from, the basically zero cost that I'm getting it for, to all the way up to $20 to $25 a pill, and sell it at schools like colleges or at high school parties, right? Those are the guys that are going to be paying 10 or $15 a pill or more. Because high school, even when I was younger, when pills weren't really a big thing, Xanax was really on the scene in high school. Everybody was talking about Xanax, and everybody was getting Xanax. And pills are a very it's interesting how normalized they are, I guess, so that it makes it easier for people to want to do it, because it's oh, my mom takes this for her anxiety, or my dad takes this for his back pain, you know?
And Callum, as I mentioned before, when you talked about in the documentary, you have this moment where you say, one of the reasons that I was pushed into recovery is because I could see the pain in my loved ones' eyes as I would lie to them time and time again. And eventually that drove me to wanting to seek treatment. So would you then ultimately say that it was the fact that you did have a loving family that was the reason that you decided to seek treatment for your addiction?
Yeah, a lot of it too is that, that's one thing that, it really does make a difference. And the sad thing about a lot of guys that I had come into contact with, and gals that were all, addicted to fentanyl, but selling me their safe supply pills, essentially they were at their last end of the road. Basically, their family, had turned their backs on them because they gave them reason to, right? Addiction is very deceptive. It makes you, it makes you want things that you don't really want. It makes you do things you don't want to do. It makes you go back on your word. It makes you, unable to basically show up for things that you need to show up for. You become more of and if you don't basically if you don't allow your family to help, eventually they may, depending on the family too, they may kind of, be like, okay, I'm done dealing with this for a while because I don't know what to do, right? It's very hard to deal with because I've had, I've had other family members with other issues, right? Even alcoholism, in Canada is a big thing too. And it's very hard to tell somebody to not do something when their mind is really, really set on it. And the very powerful thing about addiction is that you build your whole kind of, I guess, way of life around it. When you've been doing whatever you're doing for long enough, it becomes a part of you almost. And
So,
yeah.
sorry, go ahead.
Oh no, I just kind of was thinking at the same time too, uh, you know, uh, the environments that come with stuff that's as intense as fentanyl, it can really hurt the family too. I was lucky I never got into it, but I saw how worried my family was, when I was gone, and they knew I was, going to places where I shouldn't be because, let's say like I fell asleep, they would open my bag and they would see like a switchblade or something because I did not feel safe in these environments. And I knew that if anybody felt that they could take advantage of me, they would. It can get very dangerous, especially when everybody has their back up against the wall. With fentanyl, it really does do that. It makes it so that everybody's on their last dime today. They're on their last leg. They're going to have to make a last ditch effort to make money, and it makes it very volatile too. And it makes people do things they don't want to, like steal. It's just bad all around, right? It hurts everybody, and
Right.
sometimes for the family it gets too painful. And it just really hurt me to be like the source of that pain. It kind of took me a while to really think about it, but eventually, when I'd seen like the way my parents, when they talked to me and, when they saw the things I was doing, I could see the pain in their eyes. And it was really, it really hurt because that wasn't me. I don't want to hurt people. I don't want to hurt my family, right? But it does kind of take something that really gets to you to kind of pull you out of it.
So, with that in mind, Adam, what is your response to something like what they're pitching in Alberta, where Alberta Premier Danielle Smith has said that she would like to pass legislation that would essentially force addicts into recovery if that's what their family desires? Would you be in favor of something like that? It's still considered quite controversial, even among conservatives, especially given what we just came out of during the COVID-19, where we saw a lot of coerced vaccination. What would your response be to a policy like that?
I think it's a good idea in theory, and I think that while some people have said that it would not be able to survive a constitutional challenge, I think that there's precedent here. We do involuntarily institutionalize people who are going through mental health crises. But the big question here is whether or not there would be capacity to absorb people who need to be put into involuntary treatment. In many parts of Canada, there is so little addiction treatment capacity that people who voluntarily seek out treatment cannot get help. And this is why Marshall Smith, who is Daniel Smith's chief of staff and who has been the big architect of Alberta's recovery-oriented system, has actually cautioned other provinces to go very carefully into the forced treatment space. So he recently chimed in when the BC government said that they were going to explore involuntary treatment, and he emphasized that you need to spend years building out your treatment capacity so that you actually have spaces to put people when you want to force them into treatment against their will. Now, from my understanding, the evidence base for forced addiction treatment is inconclusive. Some people have said that it doesn't work. Some people have said that it works. What I'm hearing from the addiction physicians who I speak to right now is that they're not sure either way. What we can say, though, is that even if mandatory treatment has a low success rate, that is better than no success rate. It is better to put someone into a treatment option that may save their life 5% of the time and to put them into that treatment option again and again and again, understanding that while they're in treatment, they're no longer harming others, than to simply abandon them onto the streets and allow them to destroy themselves while posing a threat to general society.
Yeah, I think Alberta is doing things a lot differently than some of the other provinces. So it'll be interesting to see the evidence coming out of the province over the next few years, whether some of these processes like forced treatment end up working. We might have more evidence on that within, 10 to 15 years. Adam, we actually have a clip of your documentary. Let's play that now so viewers can get a sense of what to expect when they go watch Government Heroine.
I'm Callum Bagnall. I'm a student at Fanshawe, but I also was a drug addict for a while, and I did end up being addicted to safe supply drugs. For a while I was taking Percocets, Oxys, but then it got too expensive around 2021. In that time, I got connected with somebody through a job who lived at a one of those buildings where they have post-homeless people. They were able to live in this building with income-geared rent. He told me, hey, in this new building I'm living in, there's loads of people that are on these safe supply drugs. At first I didn't believe it. I was like, there's no way that on that scale people are getting hundreds of pills a day or close to 100 pills a day. I got numbers and contacts for safe supply pills, and I was able to pick up safe supply drugs much cheaper than Oxys or Percocets.
So Adam, this issue came on my radar first with Aaron Gunn's work, Canada is Dying and Vancouver is Dying. I know a lot of my viewers have seen those, and I encourage everyone who I talked to go watch those documentaries. So what were you seeking to do with Government Heroine that was different than what we already saw? And how did you hope to kind of further expand on this issue?
Well, so I've been reporting on safer supply diversion since about May of 2023. And I've written about 50 articles on this issue about how safe supply drugs are being diverted en masse to the streets. Unfortunately, many of the advocates that support safe supply, they say that this is all disinformation. They say that there is no evidence that this is happening, which is really unfortunate because I've interviewed dozens of addiction physicians who say that this is happening. I've interviewed a large number of former drug users who say this is happening. I've, found countless examples of this trafficking happening online. And although the provincial government in BC is slowly beginning to admit that this is a problem, federal government continues to deny any issue whatsoever. Because, let's be honest, their political future is tied to this program. It's really embarrassing if the signature addiction policy that you championed for years is actually a disaster that is getting kids hooked on opioids. So I have interviewed many former drug users who have either accessed diverted safer supply or know other people who have accessed diverted safer supply. But because there is such a crushing stigma against addiction, many of these people don't want to go on record. And so I either have to only use their first names or use pseudonyms. I can't include any photographs of them. And what that means is that Canadians don't have an opportunity to fully understand the stakes involved here and the harms of safer supply because, in a sense, the victims are hidden behind a veil. The details, photographs, videos that impart vivid authenticity into the storytelling is missing here. And this has allowed many of these safer supply advocates to convince many Canadians that this is not a real problem. So when Callum reached out to me about 2, 3 months ago and shared his story and said that he was willing to go on record and he was willing to go on video, I saw this as a very powerful opportunity to show Canadians what is actually happening. Because when you watch someone and hear someone describe their personal experiences, and you do the same with their mother and with their doctor, it's far harder to say that there is no problem. And I do know that Aaron Gunn has interviewed people who have been harmed by safer supply as well. The difference between this work and his is, once again, that Callum is on record and that the length of the interview and detail that we go into his life is greater than what we've seen in previous documentaries. Though I imagine that Aaron Gunn will probably release more work in the future that will further expand on this story.
When you talk about the government's success really being tied to this program, I mean, there's more evidence coming out every day of how much of a failure this policy has been, with people like Callum speaking out, although admittedly, as you mentioned, not always putting their names and faces to the story. What's it going to take to see a change? Is it really just one of those things, like with so many other things in Canada right now, where we're waiting for a change in government?
So there's two sides. So first of all, there needs to be a change in government, and we see this in BC, where in the lead up to the BC election next month, the BC NDP have backtracked on a large number of safer supply policies because they see that it's become a political liability and that their polling numbers are slumping and that voters are defecting en masse to the Conservatives. The BC Conservatives only had 2% of the vote about a year and a half ago. Now they have 44%, approximately 40%. So they're running neck and neck with the BC NDP. And what that means is that all of a sudden decriminalization is off the table, crack pipe vending machines off the table, safer bathrooms where public washrooms are converted into overdose prevention sites. That's off the table because Premier Eby knows that if he doesn't pivot, that he's going to lose his government. So I would imagine that the federal Liberals will have to go with a similar kind of reckoning in about a year or so as well. Now, the second route, of course, is the legal route with lawsuits. So in BC, the family of a young girl, 13 years old, who died from addiction after developing an opioid addiction due to safer supply. So her family is launching a class action lawsuit against the BC government and a few other stakeholders as well. And the friends of that girl who developed opioid addictions but did not die but are in recovery are part of that lawsuit. So I think that's something that will pressure governments into changing their policies and also will pressure prescribers into not prescribing safer supply because they know that they risk getting sued. Now, safer supply is also a provincial matter because healthcare falls under provincial jurisdiction. The federal government has funded safer supply programs, and it has created some exemptions that allow for the prescribing of safer supply drugs. But fundamentally, if you're prescribed safer supply in Ontario, for example, that goes through our provincial healthcare system. It is dispensed through our pharmacies and then billed to OHIP. So provincial governments do have a role to play here. The Alberta government made it functionally illegal to prescribe safer supply. They did face some lawsuits and they were forced to continue providing safer supply to, I believe, one person. Ontario could go down that same route. But the problem is that, from my understanding, they are concerned about the legal challenges there and are trying to find a way to legally block access to safer supply without getting stuck in a quagmire of lawsuits.
So even if, let's say, next year we have an election, the Liberal government's toppled, we have a Conservative government that wants to end safe supply, we're essentially going to be stuck with a lot of addicts who are going to need help. We've talked a little bit about what Alberta's doing is different. They're really being their leadership, and they have sort of a pilot of treatment centers. They've spent hundreds of millions of dollars on these recovery centers. Haven't really seen that same level of investment in Ontario. So what do other governments need to do across Canada? We've talked about Alberta. Do other provinces like Ontario need to follow Alberta's lead? What are we going to essentially do with all these addicts? As you've mentioned, there's already an issue of there not being enough treatment centers for people who do want treatment. So do you see that being a crisis in the coming years?
I'd say so. And I think the thing is that on the Ontario government, the Ford government needs to have more political will here. I know that the Minister of Mental Health and Addiction, Michael Tibolo, is very competent. He's a psychologist with a background in addiction. He understands the studies. He's pushing for change. What I haven't seen in my reporting is a significant will for change from the Premier's office. Sometimes it feels like they're sweeping this under the rug or not paying too much attention. And I think they're able to do this for two reasons. A, they're able to simply blame Trudeau and therefore they're offloading the political costs of their inaction. A great example of this is a letter that Ford wrote to Trudeau, or rather to the federal government a few months ago, where he said, we want you to stop funding these safer supply programs. We have no idea how much hydromorphone, which is an opioid as potent as heroin, is flooding into our communities because of this program. Well, that's not actually true, because hydromorphone is once again paid for through OHIP. So the provincial government should have that data. And that letter essentially offloaded all responsibility for safer supply, or rather fighting safer supply, onto the federal government. And because of that, it seems like the Ford government said, well, we've washed our hands of this, we've done what we could, when that's not the case. I also think that the Ford government is very comfortable politically. I mean, their polling numbers are great, and right now the Ontario Liberals and Ontario NDP are in shambles. And I think that's created a sense of complacency. Because the Ford government doesn't have to worry about losing the next election, it hasn't felt that much pressure to actually address the safer supply issue. All they do is blame someone else when they should be getting these drugs off the street.
Adam, for people who want to watch your documentary and learn more about your work, where can they go?
Well, I mean, if you want to watch the documentary, you can always go on YouTube and just Google Government Heroine full movie. You have to do the full movie piece, otherwise you're going to get a whole bunch of other stuff about Government Heroine. And you can always follow me on X. So I'm Adam Zivo, but my X handle is Zivo Adam. That's Z-I-V with a V-O. And you can always read me in the National Post. I'm always there, at least once a week, talking about drugs and other issues.
Adam and Callum, thank you both so much.
Can I add one small thing before we end it?
Go ahead.
As Adam was saying, like with the trying to close the safe supply clinics, you'll have a lot of addicts that are, still, they've been either taking the safe supply or they rely on it to not go into withdrawals. And like what I could say to that is that we already have the medications even before a safe supply program was really rolled out. We have methadone, we have Suboxone, we got newer ones like Sublocade, which is a shot where they give you into your fat cells in your stomach, and it lasts for the whole month. You don't even have to go back another time. You get one shot and you're good. They've got even strips of Suboxone that you can put under your tongue. There's so many, and they work well. Like I think the reason why safe supply was a thing was it's hard to get addicts to want to take Suboxone or methadone because you're not going to be getting high from Suboxone unless you're taking a dose that's too high for you. Or with methadone, even though it could get you high, it's heavily controlled. You have to go to the clinic like every morning for probably more than a year to build up enough rapport to bring back carry medications home. And I think yes, it is hard to go down that route, but ultimately, right? What is easy in life? The best things in life are always hard. And like for me, like Suboxone has really saved my life, right? The whole point is to not be getting high anymore. Like the high is what brought you in. You need to get out of that because it deceives you, right? You don't want to be getting high because it takes you away from what you really need to be doing in life, And that's kind of what recovery is about, just living without needing to get high.
Callum, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, everyone. So that was Adam Zivo on his new documentary, Government Heroine. I definitely suggest you go take a look at it on YouTube. That's where I watched it. I've been covering the safe supply issue for a few years now. You'll notice a lot of my questions were focused on Alberta because, as most of you know, I've done so much Alberta coverage, and they're really doing very unique things with treatment there and the way that they've approached the safe supply regime. So definitely go take a look at Adam's work. He's the expert on it, and he's been covering this so much. Now, we're going to turn our attention to the next segment of the show, the clip of the week. Last week, I had that stunning clip of Jennifer Johnson. For all of you, we now know that Alberta Premier Danielle Smith has said she's going to talk to her caucus about letting Johnson back in. And I wrote a column this week basically about how the left's efforts to cancel Jennifer Johnson has spectacularly backfired because now it's all that anyone's talking about, and Conservatives are demanding that Alberta Premier Danielle Smith let Johnson back into caucus. this. So I suggest you go take a look at that column if you want to know what's currently going on with the situation. Now we're going to head to the clip of the week. This one is of Melanie Jolie. I haven't actually seen this clip yet. Sean picked it for us. Yes, I'm sure many of you are familiar with Sean. He was Andrew's infamous producer, and now I'm lucky enough to have him. So he picked this clip for us to take a look at today. So let's go to that now of Melanie Jolie.
We're all aware of the global pushback against women and our human rights, and the increased threats faced by those who dare stand up and advocate and protect women's human rights. Digital technology may have increased freedom of expression, but it has also silenced voices. Over the last 2 days, foreign ministers from around the globe came together. We exchanged experiences and lessons learned, and we identified potential solutions for positive change. First, within the UN system, it is time for the next Secretary General to be a woman. And that was clearly called on by all women foreign ministers. The UN has been existing for more than 75 years, so it is more than time. We also need better gender parity for the presidency of the UN General Assembly. And when it comes also to Afghanistan, we called on the Taliban to restore women and girls' rights to education and meaningfully participate in public life.
So lots to unpack here. I think this was a good clip to discuss. First off, I think Melanie Jolie speaking at this conference and starting off talking about how women all over the world, are essentially being persecuted and suffering solely because they are women. It's not really relevant to a discussion about Canada and America. I don't believe that women are discriminated against in any capacity in Canada or America in an institutional sense. If anything, it's probably a little bit the other way around. Nowadays, you will probably receive preference if you are a female candidate because so many companies are so hell-bent on moving forward with DEI initiatives, diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so they'd rather hire a woman than a man, especially if you're a white man. A lot of white men out there know how difficult it can be to find certain jobs or even to get admitted into colleges and universities these days. So, when we talk about this clip, there are absolutely countries where women are treated very, very poorly. And I'm so grateful every single day. Maybe not every single day, should be grateful every single day, but I'm so grateful that I am Canadian and that I was a woman born in Canada because I know that I have so much opportunity and such a chance for such a beautiful life and to really create what I want my life to look like being here in Canada. And that's not the case for women who are born elsewhere in the world. But the reason that this is just so tone deaf for Melanie Jolie right now is because there are so many issues in Canada. And as we've talked about extensively on the show today, the Canadian people are suffering. And so for a Liberal minister to be overseas talking about these issues, it just doesn't really make sense right now. We have so many problems at home. Your government is 20 points behind the polls. Why don't you come back and spend a little time focusing on these issues? And the next thing that is probably fairly obvious to all of you watching this clip is this idea that people should be promoted because of their gender and their gender alone. I cannot stand these types of policies. And I think when she talks about that, the first example that comes to my mind of why these types of policies are so disastrous is looking at the Secret Service in the United States. Growing up, the Secret Service was sort of legendary in my mind. Whenever you were at an American political event, you'd see the snipers coming on the roofs and quickly scoping it out. And in your head, you kind of thought, I'm in probably the safest place in the world right now with all these Secret Service agents nearby. And they have a no-fail mission, which means that no shots should be fired at whoever it is that they were set to protect in a given day or under a given portion of their recent assignment. And we've seen the Secret Service absolutely fall apart in recent months and weeks. I, as many of you know, cover American politics for True North as well. And I was at the Butler, Pennsylvania shooting. And that day was such a stunning security failure by the Secret Service. And we've seen a couple of them now where the Secret Service have really not been done an adequate job. And we've seen this trending more and more since the Secret Service started pushing their own DEI policies, since they said we want to have more women Secret Service agents. Now, let's just set aside the whole issue of what it says about a society that asks a woman to stand in front of a man while bullets are being shot. I think that's a whole issue, and we could talk about that on its own. And I certainly have thoughts, and I disagree with women being put on the front lines of any sort of combat, including, protecting, whether it be a president or a former president. But there's then just the issue of biological realities, which I know makes people very uncomfortable for today. But the one thing that I felt was so stunning at the Butler, Pennsylvania rally was after President Trump was shot at, he sort of fell to the ground. And then you see him get back up and you see him sworn by his Secret Service agents. And by the way, those who are experts in the industry later said that should never have happened. He should have been immediately whisked away in case there was a second shooter in the crowd, as often happens. But he was able to stand up, and that's where we got the really powerful moment of him pumping his fist and chanting "fight, fight, fight," and the beautiful imagery from that. However, there were still so many security failures within that moment. As I said, he shouldn't have been on that stage for as long as he was. And even when he stood up, there was a female Secret Service agent that was responsible for protecting his whole, basically, front half of his torso. But the Secret Service agent was not tall. President Trump is a big man. He's a tall guy. And she was not actually tall enough to protect his body. So essentially what you saw his whole head and the top part of his torso entirely exposed just moments after someone had fired shots that had narrowly grazed his ear. And in that same moment, you see the Secret Service agent bent down to pick up his shoe, then again exposing his entire top half. So certainly a number of stunning security failures there. Later on in the day, you saw, Trump had so many female Secret Service agents on his protection crew. It was almost baffling how many women there were. And you see another clip of the woman who, she wasn't even able to holster his gun. A female Secret Service agent was not able to find the holster of her gun. There's some hilarious clips. It is funny with, a saddening note to it all because it's such a serious issue. And now we've had 2 failed assassination attempts against Donald Trump. And I think a lot of us are kind of watching and wondering, like, this is not good. How come all these shooters are able to get so close to the president? And we're seeing basically the impacts of DEI trickle down into what was once one of the most well-regarded and respected agencies in the entire world. So, to Melanie Jolie's response that we need a female UN Secretary General, just stop hiring people based on their gender. It's not working. Hire people based on merit because they actually have the proper qualifications for the job. And I'm not saying it can't be a woman, but also for a woman, why would you want to be hired knowing that I received this role because they needed a woman? I certainly would not be interested in a position like that. I would rather get there on merit and feel confident. Otherwise, you're kind of constantly going to have those feelings of, am I good at this? Do I deserve to be here? Better to earn things on your own. All right, everyone. And finally, we have one last segment of the show. I did this a lot on the Alberta Roundup, where I would take a look at people's comments from the weeks before. I love responding to all of your comments on my show. So we're going to take a look at a few today. Starting off with his first comment. This is from user @emotionallyexhausted. He says, I would never ever submit to one of their struggle sessions like that in the first place. Pathetic. No job is worth that. I honestly am inclined to agree. I would never be able to submit to something like that. That's also probably why I would never run for office, is because I'm not the type of person who necessarily wants to deal with the crazies and to be sympathetic towards their cause and have to try to find a political response to people who have absolutely insane ideas. I'm much more inclined to just say that's insane or that's stupid. And so I would not be well fitted to the job of a politician, like Jagmeet Singh is not well suited to the job of a politician. And for that reason, I found a different avenue for my skills and abilities. And so, it sounds like you also would not be well suited to the job of a politician. And I totally respect that. I think few people are. And I think there's probably too many people in politics who don't recognize that it's not really the job for them. So I'm with you there. But, I do respect Jennifer Johnson for sort of speaking up for her beliefs and for being someone that we can look to and say, this is someone who speaks for our cause and who won't bow to the woke mob. And I am glad that there's people like that we can point to in politics, political leaders who we can say, thank you for being our voice. User Joel Lawrence Channel says, what you're asking of the MP, Kat and Kean, seems way too little. Have no idea what the maximum ask can be, but if her life and lifestyle are being seriously threatened, then he should have to pay hundreds of thousands of dollars, perhaps $1 million or $2 million. Defamation of character is one thing, but if she's receiving many threats to her life, she doesn't deserve that just for being a conservative journalist. Whether they are sincere or not, this guy should have to pay. So you're definitely right that they probably could have asked for more, but I know in this specific case, first of all, this was the Counter Signal's first lawsuit, in the sense where they were going after someone for something that was said about them. It is extremely stressful. I don't know how much time you guys have spent, if any of you have spent, time in the courts. It is unbelievable stressful for anyone who's dealing with any sort of litigation. And so I really respect their sort of commitment to trying to resolve this through a settlement if possible, just because it would have put such an immense amount of pressure on both Kat and Kian. And I think they just are both doing such important work, and I'm glad that they're able to focus on that. In addition, I'm sure if you all saw this, but Kat and Kian did end up receiving an apology for the defamation that was made towards Kat. So Mark Garrettson did issue a proper apology, and tagged the proper account for Kat and a correction to his original tweet. Could they have taken it further? Yes, it's likely they could have taken it further. It's likely they could have taken more money. And I think in these types of cases, you have to really weigh whether the additional money and monetary value that you're going to be receiving is worth more to you than the stress of litigation. And in the moment, for those of us looking from the outside, it's like, well, of course, you should go after them for as much money. They should have to pay for saying these wrongful things about you. But just speaking from experience of my own, I can tell you that anytime you're involved in any sort of litigation, it is extremely stressful. And I think most of us would err on the side of wanting to wrap it up as quickly as possible. Okay, everyone, that's all we have time for today on The Rachel Parker Show. I look forward to reading your comments and to choosing which ones to discuss on my show next week. I hope that you guys have a great week. I'll see you later. God bless.